I think we'll be fine, but we'll keep that in mind. If we need to move something up, we will.
Come a little early.
Yeah, let's see.
Hello, hello.
All right. You nervous?
See you out there. Chit-chatting.
Where?
Okay. Everybody ready? We're going to go ahead and call to order the special call meeting. We're going to start with a moment of silent reflection for our first responders and members of the armed forces. That'll be followed by an invocation by our property appraiser, Mr. Wesley Davis, which will be followed by the Pledge of Allegiance by the county administrator. If everybody would please rise.
Our Heavenly Father, we thank you for the opportunity that we have to come before you today and to conduct the public's business. While this may seem very mundane, it is extremely important to give our commissioners the guidance, knowledge, and the wisdom as we look down in the future and look out for the best for our beautiful community. May we use your knowledge and wisdom to shape those decisions and to keep this community what it is today. In your heavenly name we pray. Amen. Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Right.
All right. We are going to start with a presentation of the Indian River County 2024 Comprehensive Plan Evaluation and Appraisal Report, commonly known as the EAR. Welcome.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Chris Balter, Planning and Development Services Director. Just want to give a quick overview of what we will be discussing today. So the comprehensive plan is a 10 to 20 year policy framework guiding the community's future development in areas such as land use, housing, infrastructure, transportation, and environmental and conservation. The evaluation and appraisal report every 7 years by state statute. We have to take a look at our comprehensive plan to see if we have to make any changes to it or updates. What the EAR review seeks to ensure this plan aligns with updated Florida statutes, reflects best planning practices, and meets the community's needs. And I'm going to introduce Kelly Kepler with Kimley Horn to go over the PowerPoint for the summary.
Thanks, Chris, and good afternoon, Commissioners. For the record, Kelly Klepper with Kimley Horn. Also with me today is Ms. Heather Glisson, who is a senior planner and also very heavily engaged with this review and assessment. If I can get the PowerPoint, I would appreciate it. I know Chris provided a couple of different summaries, some very easy to read, follow documents, the two-page summaries, both of today's presentation as well as the EAR document itself. I'll say those two documents, I would love to be able to say what he said and what's in those two documents and then start to go through questions. But I want to make sure we're kind of going through the logistics of the EAR, as Chris said. You know, it's an evaluation and appraisal. Based off of the work that we have undertaken in partnership with Chris and the county's team over the last bit, and then also building off of those and other initiatives that the county has undertaken, whether it's been the rural visioning or the urban services boundary, some of that, to make sure that what we're proposing as part of this review and update and series of recommendations is consistent with that, but also that it's community-driven, community-focused, and consistent with the county's vision. So with that, what I'm going to do is to also say that there was an addendum that was distributed by Chris earlier this morning. That was to the review matrix. That is a supplemental document. It reflected about 7 to 8 additional corrections that both Chris and the county administrator had provided us. Primary updates on that were references to the Parks Master Plan and one of the integrated plans, so a couple of just plan references. The components of that and or the main ideas behind that did not change. It was just an update on a couple of the terms and references in that. So as Chris said, the comprehensive plan, of course, is your long-term vision, the 10 to 20-year look out to see where do we want to be in the next 10 to 20 years. And it's based off of a couple of different things. One, it's looking at the population growth that we are projecting. And when I say we, the county as well as Florida Commerce, formerly known as DEO, Department of Economic Opportunity, as well as the MPO, the Water Management Districts, and a number of other different entities. So looking at that population and to make sure we have enough land to sustain the growth. And where does that growth go? So that's one of the things I was going to say this morning. I applaud the county because you've been very proactive in your planning, visioning, and approach, and also being very robust on community outreach. I will say that you're probably one of the leaders in that. We work with a number of communities across the state. A lot of people will just check the box and kind of keep moving. What we did as part of this project, and I know there was a similar community outreach component, was to go where the residents live. You know, we had a series of community workshops around the county. We followed that up with a second round of community workshops, plus then a series of online surveys and information. And as you know, we talked about with the county administrator and the team here, we had over, between in-person and or the online, over 600 respondents participating in this process. Doesn't sound like a lot, but when you think about from a comprehensive plan process, and this was just the evaluation, that is a fairly significant number of residents who took the time to provide us comments and thoughts. So as Chris said, the goals of the year, it's kind of like when you go to the doctor and you're getting a checkup. They tell you, hey, this is what's going on, your hearing's good, your eyes are good, let's take a look at your heart or your cholesterol, and then they prescribe a course of action. That's the exact same thing that the EAR does. It provides you a roadmap of items that the county can consider for adoption or amendment as part of the subsequent process. Does this mean that we're amending the comprehensive plan today? No. Does this give you the items that have been recommended throughout this process and working collaboratively with the county staff? Yes. So now you have the ability, there's certain things that you have to undertake through the statutes, other things that you can kind of take a look at and maybe time out a little bit more. But the other thing that I will say is, as Chris said, is it's not only just looking at what the statutes say, but it's also what's been accomplished. So let's celebrate successes and let's start to turn our attention to what's the next items that we have. But more importantly, and this is where, working with the county administrator very closely, it was, let's not be so visionary that we bankrupt the county. So we need to be financially or fiscally feasible in this approach as well. There are a number of other communities that have either painted themselves into a corner or committed to plans and procedures that have cost them or will be costing them a significant amount of money moving forward. So there again, right-sizing your vision, right-sizing your plan, marrying that up with the county's resources to make sure that there again, we're being economically respectful of the resources we have, and more importantly, being financially feasible. So as we talked a little bit about the community engagement highlights, there again, a series of workshops in person, online, plus a number of opportunities for residents to also provide comments in writing to Chris and the staff. These were some of the most well-attended, especially for those of you, because I know a lot of you had the ability to participate in those. We heard a lot of great comments. It wasn't just, we don't want growth. It was really kind of getting into things as far as sidewalks and parks and environmental responsibility. Growth was in there, of course, but it wasn't always negative. It was a lot of positives. There was also a lot of celebration of successes. Well, the county's done a great job with this. So being able to provide those comments, and we did provide a companion document to what we've provided here that would be also at the county's use moving forward. So from a report highlight, there again, I'm not going to go through every single element, every single page as far as each individual comment. We're going to go through and talk about each of the elements, but at a higher level. What you'll see a lot of times was that there was inconsistent use of terminology. Chris has come up with, he provided the best example of one person wrote this, another person wrote that, and they never really were in the same room to talk. So you had the same ideas but had different words being used. So the easy thing is to say, let's clean up for a consistency approach. Other things, there were components of your comprehensive plan that included zoning code or development code or standards like engineering that really should not be in your comprehensive plan. They should be either in an engineering manual or your code itself. So much so that the state actually adopted a statute a number of years ago that said the plan is the plan, the code is the code, and the two should not be the same. So in essence, making sure that there is that supporting document that provides that credibility and supports what we're trying to construct or develop on the ground. Removal of redundant goals, objectives, and policies. What we found in a lot of cases was that there was something in future land use that was repeated in housing that was also repeated in like one or two others. You only need to say it once, so why do we keep repeating some of that? So there again, cleaning up a lot of that. As part of this process, we did go through the county's complete comprehensive plan, all 12 elements, and just kind of diving into the specifics. And I would encourage you, if you've got questions along the way on a specific element, Chris and I are here, as well as Heather, to be able to answer some of those questions. And if there aren't any, I'm just going to kind of keep moving. But I know that there was, like I said, a lot of review and input from the team here to try to make sure that this was clear, easy to follow, and provided a good guiding document or that roadmap for the future. So if you give me 1 second. So when we talk about the future land use, of course, that is kind of what everybody thinks the comprehensive plan is. The nice colored map on the wall that says, okay, my property is yellow, so that means I'm residential, and the red is commercial. Unfortunately, that's not the entirety of the comp plan. All of the elements have to talk together. So when we looked through the element, and this is also in your matrix, one, we started to recommend removal of portions, and this was probably one of the sections that had more of the code components, identifying those to be pulled out and moved into your code. Celebrate successes, remove those plans and policies and things that have been completed because they were just taking up space. And then also making sure that we are updating statutory references. That was a resounding theme where there were still some references to the Department of Economic Opportunity or other agencies that have since changed their name, or they made reference to agencies that have, I'll say, gone on to bigger and better things, and there's a more accurate and legally defensible agency that we're working with at this point. So future land use, of course, we did not recommend changes to anyone's land use, nor did we get into the discussion as far as the urban services boundary, knowing that that was a specific policy discussion and plan that was running in parallel. So there are some references in here, but again, making sure that there was a clear delineation in what we were recommending. Sanitary sewer. The county has a very robust program when it comes to providing sanitary sewer services. And of course, as areas are growing and developing, who's providing that service? Water and wastewater as well. So there were some references in here to the Department of Health, some references to the Florida Administrative Code, as well as the statutes. And also there were some references in here, and we did talk and work with the county administrator, that the county really didn't have jurisdiction to be able to regulate because it's under other state program or agency. So making sure that those responsibilities were being put in the right buckets. And then also that this is one of the first references to an updated plan, but the Integrated Water Master Plan. There may be additional items that come out of that plan that the county is working on, which would necessitate some additional updates to this element moving forward. Potable water. We all like to make sure we have enough water to sustain our population, and that is a critical component. So making sure that not only are we consistent with the county's water supply facilities work plan, or sometimes what we refer to as a WSP, but there again, talking about the integrated master plan approach for water, wastewater, and also some of our other utilities components. One of the things we did look at, of course, was interlocals. Because the county does partner with a number of other communities as far as providing certain services to make sure, one, that their growth rates are accommodated within the water supply plan, but then making sure that the county has enough resources to be able to accommodate its own population growth. Solid waste. One of the keys that came out of this, and this was, I think this is definitely a success, we're seeing reductions in the solid waste stream. So the life of some of these public facilities is actually getting extended. People are utilizing different things. There's a little different approach to solid waste disposal. So we're seeing a reduction in how much waste is being generated, which only extends the life of current public facilities and/or, I'll say, reduces overall cost to the county. Natural groundwater, being this community, when you start looking at this plus the conservation and the coastal element, these are some of the most important. What goes on from a groundwater perspective, what, of course, affects what's going on with the lagoon. And all of these things kind of are interrelated moving forward. So the biggest highlights that we had coming out of this was, one, making sure that there was the correct language that allows the county to do certain things, but also not overcommitting it again. When you start looking at some of this, it was there was the thou shalls, and when you started putting a price tag to some of this, it became unrealistic to some extent. And also, it's things that the county is either undertaking or has identified as part of one of their other plans. So there again, just starting to right-size this element with the language that we have. And also, as technologies change, giving the county the flexibility to be able to adapt to those. Instead of having you all, there again, painted into a corner, it allowed more flexibility in order to be able to provide those services and/or address groundwater moving forward, but still working within the confines of what the county wants and what the state and the other agencies are working towards. The other thing on this one was also to start to move components from the natural groundwater into the conservation element where they really should be placed. And again, starting to identify some things that would also work, I'll say, promote anti-sprawl. I know that still is one of those terms we continue to use from time to time, but just working towards those provisions that are still looking at where are we growing and how, and making sure that that aligns with our utility provisions. Stormwater, unfortunately with the storms that we've had over the last several years, stormwater ends up being another one of those kind of key focuses. So what we had, of course, working with staff on this one was to, again, look at flexibility, to provide that language that is a guide versus, I'll call it the stick in this case. Also making sure that we were moving things that were more akin to being in the engineering manual out of the comp plan and into the manuals themselves. What we have a lot of times is a community that will have certain standards, whether it is specific parking, believe it or not, yes, people put parking in there, building heights, or some of our stormwater rates and or designs. And as technologies change, as things change, in order to actually be able to implement that as part of a design manual, technically you should be updating your comprehensive plan as well. But a lot of places don't do that. So just working there again with staff to remove some of that. And then also, again, looking at that financial feasibility and ensuring that there's funds available to do what we need to do over the next 10 to 20 years. Transportation. This has always been a big topic. You've got a great MPO and Brian in looking at that long-term growth, especially from a mobility standard. It's not just about the cars, it's also about pedestrians, it's about the bicycles, it's about the trails, it's about all forms of connectivity and mobility. So, I wonder if it's going to be the F-18 again. That was transportation. But also looking at, extending that planning horizon out to the 20 years and then aligning both with the MPO as well as the state from a classification system. Economic development, this is one of those elements that's not required. It's an optional element as defined by the statutes, but it's actually a really good one because you've started to set the stage for what type of industry, what type of employment, what do we want to do from an economic development perspective? Is it always just about industry? No. Is it about ag? Yes. Is it about the economic engine that you have right across the street? Yes. So starting to make sure that we're focusing in on some of those targets. And again, celebrate successes, look at new targets, look at new options and opportunity that further diversify the overall economic engine that is Indian River County. Capital improvements. This is, I'll say, one of the easier ones from a comprehensive plan perspective because the county has to develop a CIP and then also a schedule that goes with it that says these are the projects we're going to do from a capital perspective, the sources of income, and when they're going to be constructed. So the easy thing on our end was to update standards, but then to make, of course, reference to the most recent CIP and the CISs that are being adopted and approved by you all moving forward. Housing, big takeaways from this one, just having provisions that are supported by the overall long-term vision that was adopted to look at accessory dwelling units, but also references to the state initiated Live Local Act. There were also two policies that were identified with respect to historic preservation and supporting the adaptive reuse of those historically significant structures. Conservation and coastal management, very similar in nature to some of the other ones, moving regulations into other, I'll say, moving the regs out of the comp plan and into those, but also supporting and enhancing, and this is something that currently finalizing and working on, of course, is the manatee protection plan that is included by reference in here. It's not a formal requirement or part of the comp plan, but it's a companion document. Coastal, looking at identifying agencies that are going to fund and implement beach stabilization as well as some of the renourishment. Again, some of the policies were older, outdated, so making sure there again we're looking at what do we want to need and or need within the next 20 years. I promise there's only a couple more here. We've got 3 total, but recreation open space. This is one of those that the county has done an excellent job on, meeting its level of service, and that's basically our parks, whether it's active or passive recreation. So the county has done an excellent job. You know, there's no changes in some of those provisions for level of service, but also making sure that we're referencing the parallel or the companion parks master plan that, again, will probably lead to some additional updates in this element. Intergovernmental coordination, very simply put, how well do you work with other agencies, whether it's the cities, the adjacent counties, the Department of Transportation, the state, or the federal government, just ensuring that those either are in place or have mechanisms to remain in place moving forward. Public school facilities, this is another one of those that's not technically required, but it's an optional element. It's good to keep this in here because it also is starting to marry up the school's long-range plan as well as the county, especially from a housing and population perspective. And then last but not least, the property rights. And this is one of those elements that was mandated by the state a number of years ago because the language is extremely clear in the statutes. There was no additional review needed as part of that. And I know I ran through a lot in a very short period of time. You have no less than 3 series of documents that go with this, whether it's the formal EAR document, the review matrices, and or the community involvement summary. So at this point, we'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Commissioners, do you have any questions, comments? Yes, Commissioner Moss.
I know you mentioned that the urban service boundary analysis runs parallel to this. How are we planning to make sure that the different documents mesh? And I'll mention in particular the 3 items that came in first, second, and third with regard to the urban service boundary. And the question was, what are the top concerns you have related to future growth within the county? So first was impact on the natural environment. That was a concern of the majority of people. Second was infrastructure, and third was traffic congestion. So which document does that belong in? Should it be reflected in all of them? Would you please speak to that?
Sure, and I'm going to ask Chris to be able to fill in any gaps that I miss here. But, you know, the urban services boundary is an excellent opportunity because it's focusing in on that long-term growth going to the west. When you start looking at, and this is something that we did collaboratively with staff, looking at not only the population, but some of those comments that were coming out. A lot of the comments that we saw during our review were consistent. Transportation, environmental stewardship, and conservation, as well as just that overall growth. So, you know, we looked at the population. We did revise and update a couple of things because their population numbers were more recent than ours when we started. But the documents align from a land use perspective as well as conservation. And there's a number of policies in here that, of course, support or will protect those environmental components. The USB document does not get into, I'll say, wetland protections and things of that nature, of course.
Exactly what Kelly said, the public input matched perfectly between the two. So all of those safeguards that were brought up during the USB report have been incorporated into the comprehensive plan with conservation and all of those elements have with our current policies, as well as strengthening, which is some of the recommendations from Kimley Horn, our existing policies. So, and they focus specifically on all of those areas that were brought up because they were brought up in both public engagements.
Now, this is not a question about policy, but with regard to traffic, is there a way that we can measure how much traffic we're adding each time we vote on a subdivision so that the community is aware of the amount of traffic that's being added for each subdivision and perhaps keep some kind of cumulative total for the year? You know, how much traffic have we added in a given year? You know, that we can know that and the community can know that, since that's one of the top concerns.
So that's actually built into our land development regulations, and it's also built into our concurrency management system. So we do track that data both in our planning department and our public works department.
Okay, well, can you speak to it, this would be for the future, publicly, when we need to vote on a subdivision, can you include that as part of the presentation that is made by planning?
So what we include is the traffic studies for the preliminary rezonings, and then for the actual plan developments, the traffic studies are included as well. So those traffic studies show the actual trips and then what improvements would be required if there was any improvements needed for the roadways.
Okay,
And it shows the amount of trips that each subdivision brings online.
okay. Is there any way to understand, you know, how many cars are, you know, in a very simple form, you know, to understand how many cars are being added each time we vote on something? Just so that everyone can understand it.
Commissioner Moss, are you asking for like a definition of what the trips mean? Like, okay, we have a development coming in, they're calculating, the traffic study is showing 100 trips a day. Is that what you're looking for, that trip information, or do you want to
I don't know how we
understand what
would,
it-
I don't know how we would measure that over time, like if we're adding 100 trips as opposed to.
There's a calculation that is used through the state and as a best practice, there's a calculation that's updated based on the use of that zoning. So like commercial, you calculate more trips than for residential. And I'm sure we can get you those documents so you know how those trips are calculated, but there's a formula based on the amount of units and what the intensity of the use is.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Additionally, Madam Chair, I think a particular subdivision, those traffic counts would be separate and distinct to any other areas of the community. Madam Chair, I do have a few questions.
Okay, go for it.
Kelly, if you could go back to that one topic you had under housing.
Yes,
I think
sir.
it was about 4 from the back.
Okay, give me 1 second. Nope. Housing, yes, sir?
The one, and I know you mentioned that this excludes some of our other plans, but one part where it talks, continue to encourage infill development to prevent urban sprawl. That sounds a lot like USB, but earlier you mentioned that these were separate plans. And having said that, what does this document, how much teeth does it have, so to speak, when we talk about continue to encourage infill development, which obviously means within the USB, to prevent urban sprawl? Now, the word prevent, was that collectively decided to, in other words, that sounds like there's no urban sprawl going to happen under this plan.
Yeah, so maybe, we might want to rephrase that because, one, the EAR document and this specific policy, well, one, the EAR document is a guidance,
Right, this is 8,000 feet.
and the
Again.
board, that is a policy decision of the board. Well, let's make that very clear. So if the board said, we're okay with expanding the USB, you're not in conflict with this document. There's other ways to mitigate sprawl through a mix of uses, through, specific placement within certain areas. And sprawl is just not single-family being placed here. It's also looking at the transportation resources, the proximity to public facilities, as well as other public resources. So there again, this is advisory. We are encouraging, it kind of goes back to the ADUs, that accessory dwelling unit, of another tool in the toolbox. If the county so desired to say, we'd like to incentivize this, and it may take some of the pressure off here, but it's not always an equal sum. We know that.
Mitigate might be better than prevent, but on to your next slide, when it talks about intergovernmental relationships, there you go. And I think this, although this is 8,000 feet, and let's say the USB is 4,000, I think this may be more directed to the county administrator on the potential or any thought of agreements that we may have with our municipalities.
We certainly, we have existing, requirements in the comprehensive plan regarding intergovernmental coordination, and we certainly will double down on those. And I think this is going to reset the time frame for those that have not been completed. I forget the time frame that they expressed having, was it the JPAs and the ISBs?
So out of the USB as well, they are closely related. Obviously, the comp plan is the overarching document, so there's going to be a lot of similarities within the intergovernmental coordination and also the ISBs as well, because they relate to intergovernmental coordination. We have existing interlocal agreements with municipalities that have been in place for a long time that do need some updating as well. And that was one of the things that came out of the comprehensive plan update as well, was relooking at those existing interlocal agreements and updating them, because we know some of them have been set, 20 years ago that need to be updated to today's time.
So to your point, the current comprehensive plan, like policy 1.3, by 2012, the county shall establish or interlocal agreements with all municipalities. So I mean, by 2012, county shall contact staffs of municipalities. So these dates are being updated, and I think well, I don't think they're a panacea for success in terms of the joint city-county meetings, but they certainly laid a foundation to open the doors of communication, and I've noticed some pretty good communication since. But we obviously, once you understand at the last meeting, it was the USB meeting was discussed how there was an ISB proposed with Sebastian that was not acted upon. So now we have an opportunity to revisit that.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but every municipality, township, county, whatever we want to call them, village, they are required to have this very similar document submitted as well.
They're required to have an intergovernmental coordination element. Acting on the interlocal agreements is,
Yeah.
they don't seem to get past that sometimes in other areas.
But we do have to report this document to the state, that's correct.
That's correct.
So the municipalities, village, townships, and others also have to submit this.
That's correct.
And in their language, it probably says something about intergovernmental coordination as well.
Yes.
Okay.
Which may be very different.
Or not exist.
Yeah, that, I was being correct.
Sometimes what most municipalities or other counties that don't want to enter into agreements, they'll make their language very vague.
Other questions?
Madam Chair?
Yeah.
Yes, and thank you. Enjoyed the salad. You referred to a term, sprawl, We've been talking about it for many years. It's very interpretive. Your definition of sprawl, because you want to prevent it.
The document wants to prevent it.
The document prevents it, but he's the author.
Right.
So sprawl is a defined term under Florida statutes, and it actually provides a certain number of criteria, but what the state did was to take away some of those characteristics. But generally, if it is a single-use, low-density, or extremely low-density that's just being extended beyond where you can provide those services, whether it's police, fire, schools, parks, water, wastewater, that is generally what I refer to as sprawl.
So it's a differentiation between the coterminality of the logistical burden of expansion.
That's my personal definition and use of it. There again, it's also the beauty's in the eye of the beholder. There is a number of characteristics or criteria in the state statutes that says you can find that something is sprawl if you meet, like, was it, Chris, 3 or 4 of the following 8.
I believe so, yeah.
Yeah, so there again, I mean, it's subject to interpretation. Sprawl is a very generic, general term. Again, if you were to say, you know, we don't have any population growth over the next 20 years, but yet we're going to expand our service area for water and wastewater by X, somebody could very easily go, well, that could be sprawl. Or if you start going to, you know, 1-acre tracts or 5-acre tracts, and, you know, I'll say further on the west side of the county, somebody could opine that that's sprawl.
Growth,
But
development.
growth and development, again, there again, but the nice
Urban
thing
service
about,
boundary.
the nice thing about it is a policy discussion and decision by the folks that are sitting here that are elected by the residents of this county to make that determination based off of a number of factors.
I just didn't want anybody to think, oh, you want to prevent that sprawl thing, whatever that is.
And there's a lot that goes into it, Commissioner.
I know that.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm not going to sit there and say, oh, it's an easy thing. If you hit this, then you're automatically sprawl. You know, prior to coming to Kimley Horn, I worked in central Kentucky. We had a defined urban services boundary up there, and we looked at very similar to what DCA used to, maximum populations, maximum land coverage, and certain other things. But what we very quickly realized is that not every piece of property within the urban services boundary was actually for sale or could be developed for some reason. So that's where I'm saying there's got to be that also that policy discussion and decision by those that make the policies because of the potential impacts on traffic or cost to water and wastewater.
Okay, and I'll refer back to Commissioner Moss's question regarding traffic. Would that be a major concern because of the comprehensive and collaborative burden upon the traffic when you're looking at an overall movement?
So there again, you start looking at what's the long-range transportation plan, what is funded for new roads, what is that adopted level of service? You know, the county has an adopted level of service, whether it's C, D, E, or whatever else, and that basically says that we think that there could be, we're okay with this much traffic on this road and/or delay in that. So that is, again, one of the factors. And what we've started seeing a lot of these days is reduction in trips, especially from the, you know, the national standards that everybody uses for their traffic impact analysis. When we've looked at a number of plan unit developments or large scale, we're actually seeing less trips that are being generated by those projects than the national standards. So again, another one of those, going back to what you were saying, Commissioner, with the traffic studies, being able to analyze and make a decision based off of information and analysis.
I believe that was narrowed down to the fact that each and every project that we look at or approve as it's going forward, the traffic is carefully calculated in various categories to ensure that we have mobility. But now we're looking at this as 18,000 feet, a line.
And there again, that line is, I'm not gonna say it's an imaginary line on the ground, but there again, there are other factors that go into it. And I know when we were working with the county on the rural visioning, one of the examples we said and utilized what the image was, and I can't remember which road it was, Chris, is like urban development on one side of the road, 10-acre ranchettes on the other. And that was the dividing line between the urban services boundary. And, you know, we always started to ask why. But, and I think I'm probably just digging myself into a bigger hole, not answering your question.
Thank you.
Madam
Took a safe, okay.
Commissioner Lohr.
Chair. Kelly, I appreciate it as well. Although we're a little unique, and I'm not sure about Kentucky, if you had an interstate going through your county and you had a new entrance and exit ramp, Oslo Road, obviously, and the term prevent urban sprawl, I think we agree that we have to have some type of connectivity, or we're gonna have an interchange with hardly anything. So how does that relate to this particular document?
So let me clarify, I've actually been in Florida for 19 and a half years. That was just my I'll say Kimberly Horn, when I was Chris's counterpart.
Welcome aboard.
You know, pre-planning for transportation, working on interchange justification reports, laying out that infrastructure, yes, is a great thing, because then you're looking at transportation, but then you've got to make sure you're marrying up your resources, whether it's water and wastewater, and can you effectively serve some of that? So, you know, one of my bad dad jokes that I always make at a lot of these is, you know, government years are kind of like dog years, plan on 7 years, because by the time that you identify a potential project, design it, permit it, bid it, start the construction, and or have first phase, you're right at 7 years. So making sure that, you know, if there is new infrastructure, that it's not just being reviewed or designed in a vacuum. What are all of the other components that goes with it? And so there again, some of it can be as simple as this other land's not for sale. It's not developable. And this area is. I'm working on a number of projects on the West Coast as well, where we're having this exact same discussion with a new interchange, looking at the growth patterns, looking at the build-out scenarios, and then also looking at the land in between, saying that that is 90% wetlands.
Thank you.
Commissioner Moss?
And talking about urban sprawl, thank you for bringing that up, Vice Chair. I think it might tie into potentially the cookie cutter subdivisions. You know, I don't think we're particularly happy with that. I know I've heard out in the community, they're not happy with that. I've read it in different media that we're not happy with that. So how do we get there from here? I mean, which document would best create that kind of situation where we're trying to avoid cookie cutter subdivisions, urban sprawl, traffic? I think it's all part of the same thing.
Yeah, they are, but that's gonna be like the next layer of decisions under the comprehensive plan. The comprehensive plan takes everything that we have and like sews it all together in a little bag, and it's all in there, in the comprehensive plan. The comprehensive plan is intended to give flexibility for all your land development regulations, your traffic programs and studies, your MPO decisions, your coastal stormwater capital improvement programs, all those different things exist in your comprehensive plan by virtue of the way the comprehensive plan is written. It's written to give flexibility to do all those details. Then you start drilling down to your ordinances, your land development regulations, your development processes and review, what you use to review those different things. So if you want to prevent cookie cutter developments, you would need to have an LDR that gave a land development regulation that gave enough flexibility to approve different types and sizes and lots and all those types of things. But if you want to prevent traffic issues and level of standards on roads, that's decisions made at MPO related to A, B, C, and D interchanges and road standards. So that's where that comes into play. Where it comes into play in the comp plan is you have a policy that says that the county shall, will, may, however you want to state it, plan for an update county road standards, basically. So the things that you guys are wanting to make sure we are or are not doing, or we are preventing, or we're encouraging, or whatever the case may be, that's the next step under the comprehensive plan. So we implement this with whatever, and think of it as like a broad background. And then the next thing we're gonna do, and this is where some of the USB stuff ties in as well, is go in and start adding the details of the painting, like the leaves on the tree kind of thing, with LDR changes, with ordinance changes, with code changes, basically. Is that kind of it in a nutshell?
Exactly.
Yeah, thank you. I understand what you're saying, that it's layered. I guess my concern is, you know, we have, probably already even have some of these things on paper, but, you know, it's not what the community sees. You know, in terms of traffic, maybe it's in writing that it says, oh, the level of service is fine, it got a good grade, whatever a good grade is, D or something like that, whatever the good grade is, it got the good grade. But meanwhile, it's not happening in the real world. Sometimes I think there's a gap between what's on paper and the real world.
I think sometimes there's a misunderstanding in the real world about what the definitions of things are, right? So a level of service, we have most of our roads are a level of service C or better. So what does that mean? That means you can reasonably get through one traffic light change. You can get through a traffic light with one change. You don't have to sit there through 2 cycles. That's what C means. And if you go to most of our interchanges, you can get through. There's a lot of cars, but you can still get through in one change. If it drops below that to a D, that's when we usually at the MPO start looking at escalating those projects up on the plan that we update, the long-range transportation plan, and the one we update every year. I can't, LTPT, I don't know. There's all sorts of acronyms, but you know what I'm talking about. So I think that the community, though, when they hear level of standard C, they're thinking it's something different than what our definition is. So what I'm trying to say is I don't think we do a good job of communicating information to the public so they can understand what we're doing. And I think somewhat we are limited in our ability to regulate things, and because you can over-regulate, you can create a problem by trying to fix a problem. So think of some of your cookie cutter things. If you are very specific, then they all are going to come out the same. If you leave it a little bit open-ended, people have flexibility, but then you have to trust that they're going to use those appropriately. And the masses always suffer for the sins of the few. So that, you know, you get in these situations where then you try to fix a problem so it doesn't happen again, and you create 1,000 more problems. But I think what I'm hearing from you guys is a message to staff that as we move out of the comprehensive plan, the EAR process, and we start making our regulations consistent with the comprehensive plan, traffic, urban sprawl definitions, or the Oslo area, like those are the things that we want to make sure we're paying attention to. The ability to deliver services, we want that message carried to the next level of decision-making. And I think because that's what we heard from the public, so I think that's what is the summary of what we're trying to say. Then that might not be a decision here, but for the next steps, we want to have that included. Yes?
I just want to frame this, and Kelly, you can tell me if I'm wrong, but essentially the evaluation appraisal report is just that. It's evaluating and appraising our comprehensive plan. So it's evaluating the document and, you know, what have we accomplished, what we've not accomplished, what is the appropriate land use mixes, what are the various future land use categories. The EAR itself is not a policy document. What you have in front of you is not a policy document. It's not binding on anything. It's advising the community, or in this case, the commission, what policies may need to be looked at in the upcoming year. And then after those policies are adopted and the comprehensive plan is amended, we have a deadline by, you know, September 30th, I think, of 2025 to respond to this EAR report and update the comprehensive plan. And then after that, or concurrently with that, we will propose appropriate land development regulations that would serve the purpose of you adopt the policy, which might be the issue on sprawl, and then the LDR would be the criteria or the mechanism by which you regulate that. So, we've had some conversations, and I would say, is there may be some things, as we've discussed, that are gonna come out of the comprehensive plan because of regulatory nature. So what we propose is, at such time, we would do our comp plan amendments. We send it up to now the new agency, Florida Department of Economic
Florida
Opportunity.
Commerce.
Florida Commerce, they keep changing it. Send it up to Florida Commerce. They look at it. They're gonna provide us comments back. So then we'll have a second hearing, and with that second hearing, we would concurrently propose an ordinance that would take that regulatory issue, because some people might be justifiably concerned if you take what they believe was a regulatory issue out of the comp plan and say, well, there's gonna be a vacuum, it's gonna open the doors, everybody's gonna do something. So we'll do the timing to make sure that when one comes out, the other goes in. And that's something that all of you as a body will vote on.
Other questions, comments from the commission? Yes.
John, was a good point. I look at this, and please tell me if I'm wrong, I look at this comprehensive plan as the overall manual of what we have to do and accomplish at a county. Then we drive it down into specifics, which are LDRs, our statutes, our ordinances, and all that other stuff. So this is kind of like an agency standard operating procedures that's then brought down in the next level of something specific. I think you've done a really good job, because first of all, it needed updating without a doubt. Second of all, some redundant language, things like that, stuff we don't have any jurisdiction over or responsibility for is taken out of this. I think those are the good points, but I'm kind of relating to it in my previous career, and I don't know if the sheriff's department had a SOP of what the mission was, but I know at the fire rescue, we had our SOPs in general, and then it got down to specific on how we would handle a traffic accident or a hazmat situation or something like that, and how we would mitigate that. But this drove to make sure that we were performing those duties, and it was to keep us in check. Does what we're doing in X situation apply to Y situation? And do they, one doesn't jump above or countermand what's in our overall standard operating procedures? Would that be a fair?
It's, I say, between what you said and John, the county administrator, yes.
Okay, that's the way I look at it. I think y'all have done a good job at looking at a lot of stuff, and I've read some of it. Some of it's not the most interesting reading I've ever read, but overall, it makes a lot of sense, and it's just up to us to follow through to make sure we get the specifics right, to prevent things like sprawl, and make sure we have plenty of water, and make sure we have roads that are worthy, and intersections that do what they're supposed to do.
Madam Chair, thank you. So it goes to Tallahassee, I presume, which we talked about last week with Chris and Kelly and John and Nancy. What are John, in your experience, the common comments that would come back from the Hill saying you're out of order on particular things, or is this a rubber stamp?
So I'm going to confess that I have not submitted an ear under the current, framework. It used to be a lot more regulated when there was Administrative Rule 9J5, and they would issue what they would call an ORC report, objections, recommendations, comments. So I know they have accepted our ear, because again, the ear is not a policy document. It's when we present policies to them, which will be the comp plan policies that are predicated or based upon the ear, and then your wisdom as a legislative body, that they may provide some comments. I think it's my understanding from colleagues that they are not as forceful as they were in the past. Largely, the state agency that manages growth, ostensibly, many would consider it was gutted back in 2001, and it has continued to be,
Yeah, 2011, I believe.
Yes, 2011, yes, thank you, under Governor Scott. So, but there are still policies in the statute. I mean, there is a definition for urban sprawl. There's still things related to concurrency. There's still things making sure that we have to do things to manage growth, at least from arguably a uniform standpoint throughout the state. So unless we are deviating somewhere, and I would say in a major way, I think there's going to be some deference provided to the local governing body at how they perceive and want to manage their growth.
Right, so also, I believe, and I think it's still, between the municipalities, the townships, the villages, and the counties, I believe in the state there's about 435 separate distinct entities. So what I'm hearing is that all of those 435 are submitting some type of plan. And one agency in Tallahassee is reviewing these and sending back comments.
Yes, that is correct, but I will add, that's why there's a schedule.
Right, they're
that
staggered.
where- Yes, so they can manage the flow that comes in at any given time.
Gotcha.
All right, at this time, I think there was a couple people that wanted to say something. Did you had your hand raised earlier, sir? Okay. Please come to the podium and state your name and address.
Tom Sullivan, 4187 West 16th Square. When you were talking about the issue of traffic that you brought up and the concurrency, I think some of the problems that occur there is when the concurrency studies are done, they don't cumulatively amount for the projects that are going in the future. And that causes a problem. We can look at 37th Street in US 1 as a prime example of that. There's going to be an apartment building built. I don't want to go through all the stuff, you guys know. But I think that's one of the issues that you have to look at. The other thing, urban sprawl, I think you should use growth. I don't like urban sprawl. And then,
Sounds kind of spooky, doesn't it?
yeah, no, yeah. Sounds like the Blob, 1950.
Heaven forbid.
And then the other thing with the PUDs is I think we have to use alternate entrances and exits. For example, let's look at Antigua. I don't know if you're familiar with that, on US 1.
Yeah.
Antilles, rather, yeah. So another project's going to be built a little bit below that with about 800 homes on it. And I think what we have to look at is different ways of these communities coming in and out. When you tend to, what Commissioner Morse was talking about, when we build these PUDs, we only allow for one entrance and exit most of the times. That's for their security reasons, which is wonderful for them if they want to live in a secure situation. However, it's terrible for a traffic situation because you have all the traffic pouring out from one central point at one given time, particularly if we start getting more people at work, God forbid. But if that were to happen, I don't mean that the wrong way, I know you guys work, but what happens is now you locate all these PUDs and you locate them along one road, and then at a given time, you have everybody leaving from a central location. I just think if we would diversify that a little, it would solve some problems. That's all I had to say.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Okay, seeing none. Commissioners, I think really what staff is looking for is any input or questions really that we have about the year. And to the point that was made earlier, if this is the driving document for things we kind of need to work on in the upcoming year, is there anything we want to make sure that we've included? And I think we've given direction on that. So unless you guys have anything else that we need to do or you need input on, or anybody has any other comments they would like to make? I'm seeing none, then I think we can be adjourned.